welcome back once again to the Imaginary Gallery. It's TJ, your host. This is part 2 of the viewer request, which was on CPTSD, to hear a discussion about the recovery aspects of things such as CPTSD in relation to the aftermath. We just covered previously more of a definition of what CPTSD is, so we're not going to rehash all that now. Take it to the next step, which would involve going over the treatments listed, discussing them in personal detail, and also some other aspects of the whole CPTSD experience, and sharing some other valuable resources. Personally, I believe that a major component of CPTSD involves a simple feeling of safety, because in our regular lives we normally feel safe once we've established some kind of living routine, and when CPTSD comes along, it kind of throws all that off. Like in my situation, I was on my own. I didn't have any idea or agenda thinking, I've got to find another person. I was thinking, wow, how nice it is to be able to handle my own affairs on my own, and well, if somebody nice comes along, well, that might be something to explore, but it wasn't any agenda. So when that came forward, I kind of went through a major dynamic change, because I had personal goals when I was in high school and early college, thinking, okay, my goal is to be self-sufficient, because I'd come across many characters and noticed that they seemed to be like half people who were interested in latching onto someone else to make them complete or to support them or whatever the case was. My goal was to be completely self-sufficient and then look out for anything else if I wanted, but it wasn't a requirement. It turned out that I hung around a person that I had previously been interested in, who all of a sudden was showing interest back, and I heard the pity play story of the fact it was still living with its ex, which I thought, oh, that's not good. I decided to be generous and thought, well, I've got a place here. Why don't you just stay here until you can find your own place? Which seemed like the right thing to do. The problem was, this person knew what it was doing and had no intention of ever branching off onto its own. So that's when all the phases began of the love bombing and all that. I transitioned over to noticing how this temporary situation seemed to be working really well in certain ways, and it was kind of nice to be a different lifestyle. Like before, I was used to coming home on my own and doing whatever I do, but now I come home and, oh, there's food on the table. I think, wow, that's interesting. I never even considered that. So I slowly became brainwashed into thinking, wow, this does work out kind of nice. And I did like a self-reflection period where I already knew my viewpoints and attitudes and beliefs, but here I was being shown a different side, and I actually took the steps to transition over from, I'm fine on my own, I don't need anybody, to, well, this is kind of nice. So then I took it further, and I was probably tricked into suggesting, you know what, why don't we make this permanent? This works out nice. I noticed the credit card bills I had were just going down to zero. The other expenses were gone. I didn't have to spend one paycheck here and there. I was getting help. So I thought, well, this seems to make sense. Problem is, when you go through that, and then you go through the various stages, like the complex post-traumatic stress disorder does, it's not because you went to war and saw your friend get blown up and then you came home. It's equivalent if it was slowed down over many, many months or years, many different aspects. In this case, I had transitioned over, gotten used to the new setup, and even started to see the perks and thought, wow, I should have thought of this before, which represents a personal journey. You've established yourself one way, and then you've become introduced to something different, and you alter your whole situation, which I did. And there were times at the beginning I was skeptical, thinking this may not be real, but these characters that are cluster B monsters, one of their talents is they can keep their act going for a long time. And those of us who don't know or didn't know such people existed only have our experiences with the person to go by. And if every interaction's been great, well, then you simply think that must be what this person's like, and this is good. We don't expect them to switch to the next phase. There were many times when I would think maybe this isn't the most ideal thing, But then I would think of the good parts and think, well, but that's good. And I would think, well, this is normal. No matter who you're with, there's always going to be a question if maybe you made the wrong decision. But that goes on for years, and once you establish your comfort, and like we said before, feelings of safety, I might have felt anxious at first, nervous, worried, thinking this is different than what I'm used to. But as day and day goes on, eventually you'll reach a point of safety, which is where I felt. I was thinking, okay, I'm safe. This is the new me. Where I'm at, this is it. And you adjust to that, and it becomes habit. It becomes normal. The problem is, all this is like a building process. It's not until several years later that the evil starts to show. And then, of course, like common in many CPTSD experiences, it's natural to go through the whole thing in your head from start to finish, look back on specific events which occurred when your first instinct had been to say, hey, that's not any good, and then you were quickly silenced and told, oh, no, it's this, and you figured, oh, maybe it is this, and you're kind of like brainwashed into it, and it's a slow indoctrination process. Once it's all over and you've seen the mask slip off, you've seen the monster underneath, you can't help but turn that inwards on yourself and think, how could I be so stupid as to fall for this? Which is one of the major problems that anybody who's been involved in such a situation goes through. And I've always said before that you gotta realize you had no idea you were dealing with a first-rate con artist. They more than likely have been through it so many times that even your slight indication of disbelief or questioning, they've got an answer. They've trialed and errored, and they'll have a response. Like in a situation, if you just signed a 100-year lease with somebody, and they give you one of those explanations, it's kind of like in your best interest to go ahead and accept that explanation. But of course, once you're out of the whole nightmare, and you look back on it, you think, I knew that from the beginning, and I should have listened to my instincts. All of this contributes to the complex nature of this situation. It's not one incident that occurred that was horrifying and then you freed yourself from it. It was a long-term problem that just went on, and the more you think about the various details, the more you can feel foolish, like, wow, your perceptions really aren't that good. That's a natural way to feel, but again, remember, you're dealing with a criminal, basically. You're equipped for a regular world where things are predictable and understandable, and there are no secret mysteries or conspiracies going on, like in this case, with your covert monster who convinces you somehow that any type of questioning you may have or insecurities you may have are unfounded, unnecessary, and we're tempted to want to believe that and carry on. So once it gets to the end and you see the whole thing and see the monster for what it was, it can be devastating to have to accept the fact that you made those decisions that led to where you ended up. We're not taught in grade school to look out for people who do this. We're taught to not accept candy from a stranger, which is totally different. Back to that article I was referencing, Out of the Fog, it stated that little has been done in clinical studies on the treatment of CPTSD, and I also checked in the DSM-4 does not have it listed, it only has PTSD. But the first thing they say is to remove yourself and protect yourself from the source of the trauma, which seems kind of common sense, but isn't always. Because if you went through a traumatic event with the person and then you, let's say, see the person every single day, that's going to kind of make it difficult to deal with your condition. Because the CPTSD, it's invisible. You'll have peers and friends, people who even saw you together with the object of the evil, and to them, if you say, oh, I'm really having problems, they don't see it. They're going to see you as you, and they're going to know that you voluntarily chose to be with such and such person. So when it's all over and you're devastated, many people just will not understand. You can try to tell them and they'll think you're crazy. Removal and protection from the source would be to get yourself out of the situation where that person is, which I agree with, because if it's constantly there to remind you of itself, you may be tempted to have delusions and think, oh, maybe if I just do this way it would work right. No, it won't. Not with a cluster B monster, sociopath/psychopath type personality. They don't get fixed. You can't give them that one phrase to snap them into place. It just doesn't happen. The other thing is acknowledgement of the trauma as real, important, and undeserved, which, again, you're liable to turn against yourself or gaslight yourself into thinking, like let's say it went on for several years, to think, well, I contributed. I stuck around for all these years. I must be retarded. But again, you were being led by a skilled con artist. Maybe you even had said, "Are you a con artist?" And of course the answer is going to be no. Like I said before, you think they're going to say, "Oh yes, this whole relationship's a con. By the way," no, they won't say that. They need you for whatever supply they're getting. My old beliefs were, if I bring this up and say it, they're going to have to admit to it, and that is not true. And then you have to acknowledge the trauma came from something that was stronger than you, which I don't know if it's stronger, but I would just say that you did come across an unexpected event with the person that you maybe even acted cautious with and were constantly told, "Oh no, you're wrong, I'm not out to get you, I just like you," and you want to believe that, so you get pulled in. But you have to acknowledge that you weren't aware such things existed, and that's what happened. You got sucked in. Anybody could get sucked in. And when time passes, you'll start to see others get sucked in, and maybe even privately laugh to yourself thinking, "Ha! That fool is a one-trick pony, and look at the latest victim." And then you have to acknowledge the complex nature of CPTSD, and that it's not unimportant, even though it may not be apparent to others. I agree, it is real. You're experiencing it, and you can't necessarily expect to be able to tell others. As far as the recovery option of separation of residual problems into those that you can resolve and then others that you can't, which makes sense. And then it also talks about separating the residual problems regarding situations you cannot resolve. Like if somebody else is a disordered family member and they're doing something that they do, you can't control that necessarily. And then there's justification of what's been lost and can be recovered, which I think we go through with our thoughts of, "Oh no, I'm no longer going to have this date for this particular event we used to do." But again, that was orchestrated for you to fall for the trap. And then there's the identification of what's been lost and what can be recovered, which is a tough one because I know going through CPTSD, it's like you could look at your own situation if it was another person, and you could clearly say, "Oh, well, just get that jerk off of your mind. It was no good for you." But that does not work, unfortunately, because there's so much involved and tied into it. On one hand, in your life, you've never experienced this before. You've had great friends or best friends. This kind of felt like that. But then at the same time, you've had evil enemies, and it's really tough for the brain to piece together the idea of having one individual playing both parts. Like when they're with you, they're Dr. Jekyll, and when they're not with you, they're Mr. Hyde, and it's sick to think that this is only in the movies, and here I am dealing with it. So that could add to all this. And they talk about a program of recovery with a focus on what can be improved, placement in a supportive environment where the victim can discover that they're not alone and can receive validation, which I think the YouTube videos kind of help with that as far as the validation, because if you personally have gone through a cluster B experience with a monster and the friends or peers around you don't seem to get it because maybe they never have, well, you may feel like you're on a different planet and that you've lost it. When you reach out onto the web and see others going through the exact same situations and the exact same scenarios, it kind of helps to think, okay, well, these people here have no clue, but somebody does. Personal therapy to promote self-discovery, and prescription and antidepressant medications, which I don't really have views on either or because I know that the pharmaceutical industry is evil. That I also think they do have some things that are good, and as far as these medications, I've been on a few. I've noticed differences before, like way back in the olden days. I remember taking Zoloft because I was going through a situation that was different from anything I had before. What can add to this is, say you've been through a cluster B experience and you saw it for what it was, and then you told yourself, okay, well, I'm going to be cautious, but then you find yourself in with another one, and then maybe another one, you start to think, I must be retarded. I'm a magnet for these types and these types only. And if you talk to others, it'll sound like to them that you think every single person is evil, and, well, in your experience, they are. Now, as far as my own personal opinion, one thing that's helped in my circumstances when I had to deal with such horrifying situations of CPTSD, I specifically remember one of the very first so-called relationships I got involved in with a classic textbook cluster B monster, and I can look at the whole thing now and understand every single detail and remember how I was thinking at the time, well, maybe this is the case, but maybe it's not. I was given a date tonight, but then it did that horrible thing, and it was all confusing back then, but now I can tell what was going on. I also recall a point in this situation where there was the Hoover thing back and forth, which there was no label for it back then. There were certain physical characteristics I was really latched onto. Shallow, teenager, well, 20-something, didn't know any better. Remember feeling devastated, thinking, oh no, do certain things. That situation eventually reached a point where hopefully all of you who've dealt with these creatures will eventually reach, because it does happen, where it's a feeling of repulsion. You can look at the pretty face and see all the memories of what turned you on here or made you happy there, realizing all of that was all made up in your own mind as far as what you thought it all meant. And you get to the point where you see it for what it is, and once you get to that point, it's disgusting. Yeah, it may be pretty, but the other stuff way outweighs it. But I would use the memory of that. You get to a point where you think back to then when you just thought there's just no way you will go on without this person, even though you recognized evil but didn't have words for it. Then finally you did get rid of it, whether you did or it did, and got to see it for what it was. You eventually reach a point where you understand that there's no way I could have ever made this last. In fact, the longer I spent, the worse off I am. And you can transfer that over to the current experience, even though it's not an instant situation, but it does help because you remember your own situation where you thought like you're thinking now. Oh, I can't live without this person, even though it's evil. It gives you more of a perspective, but if it's your first one, that is not going to happen. So hopefully you can hear experiences of others to come to that conclusion. But yes, it's true, I guarantee. There was the point where there was simply repulsion, which I never, ever, ever, ever thought would ever happen, but it does. Eventually, their actions and behaviors and evil overshadows any pretty face they might have had, and then you see it for what it is, and it's just tough to translate that over to a current situation. But you then think back to, well, I remember when this other situation was current, and you kind of piece it together.
I am the Narcopath.
I am the Narcopath.
Well, if you want the real reason why I just picked up and disappeared, it's because I heard you were asking questions. You were going to the people on the websites. You were actually sharing my photo with them, and they shared a few with you. I'm sure that I couldn't stick around for that. I just left town and started up somewhere new. Don't send me your heartfelt messages of how can you just walk away from all we shared, honey. Step in line. You were one of 1,000. You weren't anything special. Just another one of my numbers. Hi, I'm Sandy Hoaxtard. Proud to be back, by the way, Milo. To TV5 fake/real news. If you're anything like I am, I love to gamble, but I ain't gambling pretty well on this Las Vegas crap. Have you noticed the stories that keep coming out? Clearly, there's a cover-up. Clearly, there's a reptilian involved. Clearly, there's a man being forced to say things he doesn't want to say, all to cover up the truth. Now, isn't that sick? But these fools to go on camera, clearly showing the reptilian over to the side, hovering over the sheriff who once admitted the truth that there were multiple shooters, as several witnesses have already brought up, a few of them dead, even though they weren't even shot. Hint, it reminds me of the Clintons. Murder anybody who gets in your way. It's just disgusting. But the fact is, I listened to the forensic analysis and I heard at least 2 different gunshots coming from 2 different distances. There's no way in hell this retarded hotel would allow these fools to mix up their timeline so retardedly. I mean, come on. When people check in a hotel, they sign their name on the dotted line. So there shouldn't be any question on when somebody checked in the hotel. Number 2, every time the person goes in and out of their hotel room, it's gonna be registered in the computer. Duh. We're in the high technology world today. You can't expect stupid stories like the ones they're spitting out at us to even be realistic because, again, we're in the modern day and age. Honestly, they expect us to believe that this one lone 64-year-old man somehow smuggled all these gigantic 100 pounds of weaponry up to his room and nobody saw it. Nobody thought anything looked out of place, even if they were in pieces. Come on now. Plus, the FBI lied about the day he showed up, which, luckily, an independent journalist forwarded the truth, and then they had to change their story. And then what'd they do? They banned her from any further press conferences because she's making it too difficult for them. Isn't that disgusting? The fact is, the FBI was in on it. They were setting up a gun sales, or you can call them ISIS terrorists from other countries. They couldn't tell the true story, because if you remember Fast and Furious, it's a similar thing. Paddock was doing an arms deal. Business as usual for him. He didn't know. Well, it happened to also include a sting operation, and the bad guys caught wind of it. So what did they do? They showed up, killed him, massacred the city, and the authorities here were running around with their panties in a bunch not knowing what to do, so they made up a retarded story. Oh, he is with ISIS. Oh, no, he's not with ISIS. Even though there hasn't been time to even investigate anything, but we've got all the answers. Journalism doesn't exist anymore, honey. I'm gonna find a new job as a con artist because clearly journalism ain't working. They don't want us to know that they do illegal arms sales so they can create enemies so we can find excuses to go to war. It's quite sick. The reptilians need to back off because they're outdated, they're old-fashioned. Everybody has a cell phone today that can take video and pictures. But they seem to think they can tell us a fabricated story and we're just gonna believe it because they said it, even though we know that hotel is drenched in cameras everywhere. They could show us a piece-by-piece revisitation of the hotel by showing the man walk in the moment he walked in, showing him going up the hall the moment he went up the hall, showing the moment he took his key card out and stuck it in the slot. Oh my God. Oh, but we're gonna mess up the time. Oh, he arrived on this day. Oh no, it was that day. We must be retarded.